Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video. This is myself, Jonathan MS Pearce, with a Ukraine news update for the 8th of January 2024, first part thereof. Let's go to where we normally start. Ukrainian general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. All the usual caveats apply. You can find them in the description to the video below. So we have the lowest personnel losses that I've seen for some time. Not the very lowest of the range, but pretty much the lowest I've seen for a few months. And that's because I imagine the weather is pretty terrible, very cold, a lot of snow, not conducive to doing combined arms maneuvers, any kind of infantry activities particularly. So I imagine, and that's been reflected on the lack of movement on the front line as well for the last 2 or 3 days. So I have said previously that I think the Russians have culminated, but we must also remember that weather will be playing a significant role in activities or lack of activities on the front line. 9 tanks, that's a fair few losses of tanks, 14 APVs and 13 artillery systems. So sort of average amounts there, give or take. 2 multiple launch rocket systems, 1 anti-aircraft warfare system. They've been fairly consistent at losing anti-aircraft warfare systems this last week, the Russians. 19 vehicles and fuel tanks. Again, not the lowest, but fairly low considering we sometimes get up to sort of 50. And 1 piece of special equipment. So I think the weather playing a role in those statistics. When we look at Andrew Perpetua's numbers that he's totted up, the losses from both sides, by looking at the socials, we can see that it's almost at parity. A few more losses to the Russians. Let's have a look at the value of each side's losses. The Ukrainians there have some comms equipment, a boat's been sunk, probably a small boat crossing the Dnipro, old piece of artillery, a few tanks there, a couple of T-64s and T-72s, not the highest value tanks, but still tanks lost, a couple of infantry fighting vehicles and civilian stuff there. Not crazy valuable stuff, and the same can be said about the Russians really. You've got, again, a bit of artillery, only 1 tank there, a number of infantry fighting vehicles, a number of APCs, Kamaz Typhoon, MRAP, so they don't have huge losses of MRAPs. I don't seem to use as many of those as, say, older APCs and whatnot. But anyway, they lost one of them, some trucks and civilian vehicles. So I guess much of a muchness for both sides, really, in terms of losses today. There is this video that's come out. There's lots of videos coming out. I don't arbitrarily pick what I show you, but I try and illustrate points in the videos I do show, or at least I reference, because if I show them I get restricted, so you have to go and watch these. These are linked in the description to the video below. Here we have 2 Ukrainian snipers taking out 22 Russians in one night in the Donetsk area. The reason I show this is because previously we've heard claims that snipers represent the second highest form of losses for infantry, for personnel in the war. So traditionally, and I don't know if this has changed now with the advent of FPV drones particularly, and IEDs being dropped from drones, but certainly earlier in the war it was artillery represented, was it 88% of the losses or something like that, and I think snipers represented 10% of the losses, and the other 2% would be like small arms fire and other things. Artillery was really the big killer of personnel. But I don't know where drones now fit in with that, with the amount of FPV drones being sent against infantry, whether those stats need to be looked at again. But certainly previously, 10% of losses were as a result of snipers. Snipers are hugely important in this war on both sides. Although this is a Ukrainian video of Russian losses, you can imagine similar things will be happening going the other way. It's just, for 2 snipers to take out 22 Russians in one night is incredible, and that's how important these guys are. And of course, if you have thermal scopes, thermal optics that can acquire targets at nighttime, then you are also very much protecting yourself from being hit from being, because one of the things with snipers is that as soon as you start doing your work, you are then communicating to the opposition where you are. And so quite often you take a few shots and then you're out of there. I don't know whether that's the same at night, whether you're afforded a greater degree of protection because it's at night. And I don't know, you might have muzzle flashes, but I don't know if you can mitigate for that with equipment. So almost certainly can. And so therefore, the only way of being spotted at night, realistically, because you don't know where the shots are coming from, it's dark, you're being picked out because of your heat signature. I presume the only way of knowing where the snipers are is to have a drone up in the air with thermal imaging yourself. So yeah, this is, and of course snipers will be protecting themselves with thermal disguises, sort of blankets that block out your heat signature. So yeah, I can imagine these guys are going to be pretty effective. Right, I did report on 2 Pantsir S systems being taken out. I'm no St. Guy, says Trent Telenko, but when I look at these 2 Pantsir S launchers being engaged by Ukrainian FPV drones with advanced automatic targeting acquisition software, this is an OSINT challenge thread, and he goes on to say, I can't help but think that these 2 Pantsir S in this Russian recovery video, the Pantsir S would have been valuable enough to merit advanced Russian Armed Forces FPV drone video feed jammers, thus the need for the SBU auto tracking software to get the kills. Two stuck Pantsir S's in the Russian video followed by the SBU kill video is a heck of a coincidence. In other words, I think one of the OSINT community comparing this set of pictures to the Russian recovery video could confirm it one way or the other. Okay, what's happened? There was this video that came out of 2 Pantsir S's stuck in the snow that Russians produced. They're like, somebody thought it'd be a good idea to upload this to the socials, and then soon after there's video footage of 2 Pantsirs being taken out by drones that I think are using some kind of AI capability. So a new era, 2 Pantsirs air defense systems belonging to the Russian armed forces were destroyed by Ukrainian drones equipped with automatic target acquisition on the northern front. So a couple of things. One, this is a capability of drones that we might not have seen or hadn't seen too much of before. There's a lot of talk about AI being utilized by both sides in their drone design. And in fact, there's something to come out to suggest the Russians are doing that and have had some success with that. And I think I've got that stacked up for my next video. So don't think that this is a Ukrainian advantage. And if you saw the segment where I was talking with Andrew Perpetua and others on the Tochny podcast or video last night, there was a lot of talk from Andrew that the Russians do have the tech advantage in drones. How widespread that is, I think, is the really important question. So I think if the Russians can produce more technologically advanced drones, but only a few of them, then the difference on the battlefield is going to be negligible. But if they're producing huge numbers of those and are having that advantage, then obviously it's going to be meaningful. I don't think it's the latter. I think it's the former. So while there might be the odd Russian drone using AI and using these advanced features, it could just be, statistically insignificant. Anyway, 2 Pantsir S's, S1s being taken out is not statistically insignificant, and these have been hit in Belgorod, in Russian territories, and it might also be a bit of a cautionary tale for the Russians not to upload footage to social media to advertise that 2 Pantsirs are stuck. Right, some evidence that sanctions are working, maybe, says Richard Vereka of Warspotting. Russia is visually confirmed to have lost 290 infantry mobility vehicles, or IMVs, so far, and a breakdown of these is below. Russia's main IFV was the Gaz TIG. I heard rumours that they cannot produce it anymore as it is reliant on imported components, so I've switched to the AMN 590-951. The graph of Russian losses does imply that this might have happened. Before we get too excited, IMVs are useful but not as important as tanks. IMVs, tanks, IFVs or artillery. In other words, kind of APCs or just trucks that can move peeps around really are not as important as tanks or infantry fighting vehicles. IFVs obviously can move people around, probably fewer people around, but they can also blow things up. And the Russians have not run out. They are just using a fully domestically produced IMV that is probably only a bit less good. Anyway, the point here is that at the beginning of the war, you had a lot of Gaz Tiger M's, and now you don't have a lot of those being destroyed. In fact, you have this grey area seems to have taken up most of the losses here, which is the AMN 590951. So I don't know much about these vehicles, but this kind of data analysis is always useful because it can give you hints about what's going on in terms of production, what's going on in terms of refurbishment, and just in terms of what they're going to have left on the battlefield. And it seems like the Gaz Tiger M have taken one for Team Russia there, and they don't have too many of them left, arguably. Right, in terms of losses, there's news emerging yesterday of the death of one of Ukraine's decorated pilots, 23-year-old MiG-29 fighter pilots, really young. Vladislav was announced in an emotional post on Instagram by his partner. His own page was Blue Helmet. Now, this is really terrible to lose pilots. They are hugely important for both sides because they represent a lot of training, a lot of experience often, and you suddenly lose that. You can't just replace them. It's not like an infantry person that you can say, right, unfortunately we've lost Jimmy on the front line, we just need someone else to fill in the boots, right, give him a rifle, let's run at the other guys. I know it's more than that, but you get the point. It's like the difference between losing a pilot and losing, an infantryman, a rifleman is vast. It's experience, it's money, it's resources, and it's time. It's time as much as anything. Now, this could be as a result of the loss of, was it a Su-27 that I reported on one of the lists the other day from the Ukrainians? So it could be that. Obviously, if it's another plane on top of that, then that's an even bigger loss. Now, it's not just military personnel that get lost, although this was a military person that was lost, but he was a poet. So there's a lot of pain in Ukraine today, not least the news. So not only the pilot, but not least the news that one of the country's best known contemporary poets and writers has died in the war. Maxim Dali Krivstov, who was just 33, had been defending the country since 2014, and he was killed as well. So when you have war, just the larger point I was going to make, the reason I wanted to talk about this is that when when you're at war and you are having to mobilize your population, you aren't just losing soldiers, you're losing people, you're losing, bricklayers and stonemasons, you're losing artists and teachers, you're losing engineers and scientists, you're losing healthcare workers, all of these people that end up being drafted into. I know he's been fighting since 2014, so he's effectively a soldier through and through these days, but he's not through and through because he's also a poet. And so any nation at war, but especially defending, where you're having to get your whole nation together to defend against this aggressor, you are just going to be hit, not in terms of just sheer numbers of people, but culturally, intellectually, in terms of trade, all these areas of society. The cross section of society gets degraded, and you are all the poorer for it. And it was never your choice. Of course, this was thrust upon you, and it's just another reason to, I guess, despise what Russia has done. Okay, the increase in Russia's use of firepower continues. Yesterday, a graphic showed Russia is using 5 times more artillery than Ukraine. I've talked about that lots. The latest to feel the effect is Krolovets in Sumy region. Rockets and drones hit the town. 23 houses were damaged. We won't news of the victims. So this is not so much in the distance section that I do talk about missiles and distance drones. This is just what is taking place every single day in terms of artillery shelling, and places like Mahanets and Nikopol on the northern shore of the Zaporizhia reservoir. And here in Sumy, across the border from Russia, places are getting hit, and the Russians are exacting a toll on the Ukrainians, especially since they have that shell advantage. Although, as I've said previously, they're still firing a fraction of what they were at the beginning of the war. Right. Russia on fire. Now, I haven't reported a lot of Russia on fire recently, but actually it's fairly significant. Here's a massive blaze southeast of St. Petersburg center, where warehouses were burning, and who knows what was in there and how it started, but there's a significant fire going off there. And then there are a few others in and around Moscow. So Russia on fire, definitely on this one. I don't normally report on domestic blazes, but this looks interesting as it's a 5-story building in Moscow. Official info states a cat died, but no people were injured. Tent was erected by the fire services to shield residents from the cold. Now, the reason I'm mentioning this is, okay, domestic fire, who cares? But it's this idea that, do you know what, it's desperately cold at the moment in that part of the world, in Ukraine and in Russia. And when you start having fires, but then also you put that together with, and we'll talk about this a little bit in the other section, there have been days where areas of Moscow have not had, and Russia have not had electricity. Substations are burning. So here, Russia on fire, sabotage, thousands are without power or heat in Rostov. So this is Rostov on Don now, further down on the level with the Sea of Azov. In Russia, though, down by Ukraine. Here we've got an area without heat and power. Russia's being a little cryptic in saying that it's due to accidents at distribution substations. Now, we've had areas in Moscow, like I've said, that have been without heat and power for days, where apartments are existing on 10-degree temperature. Now, if you think, room temperature is normally 21 degrees, 11 degrees below that, things start freezing at 4 degrees. You're having and there are apartments that are also freezing as well, that you've got freezing around the windows, and then you go out into the stairwells and they're covered in ice. People are really suffering. And, it's this very dark irony that Russia are the ones accusing of Europe, or claiming that Europe was going to go into this freezing winter, and how terrible it was, and aren't we great in Russia, where we've got all this. And I don't know if you remember that advert from last year that was like everyone in people in Britain freezing, while in Moscow they're having parties in their underwear or whatever it was. It's like the absolute opposite is happening. Like, we're fine, like Europe, no issues, whereas it's Russia that's suffering. Anyway, going on to distant strikes here. Ukrainian Air Force, right, it's been a pretty hard night. And it's been a hard night for Ukraine due to what Russia has sent. And when I've just been speaking with someone that was saying Khmelnytsky was hit, at least 3 missiles got through and have hit. When missiles get through, they are going to hit targets. Broadly speaking, they might not be super accurate, but if they get through, they're going to be doing some damage, potentially, especially if 3 missiles get through to whatever they're intending to hit, which at the moment they've moved away from energy infrastructure, although I think they still are on occasion going for energy, but it's mainly going to be the defense industrial military industrial complex, because Ukraine are putting so much effort into building their own munitions and weapons and equipment, and Russia knows that, and that's a threat to them, and they need to stop Ukraine doing that, and so they are hitting these defense plants. And that's probably what's been hit in Khmelnytsky. Not Khmelnytsky is an oblast and a city, and it's a city that's been hit, not Starokonstantinov. I don't know if the airbase was hit at all last night, but they were going for the city. In fact, I think it's been closed off, parts of the city, because there have been these big attacks. Well, actually, when you look at the stats of what's been shot down, 59 missiles and drones were recorded, but they're mainly missiles. So this is quite a significant missile attack. And actually, not many missiles were taken out. So 18 missiles, which were these KH-101, KH-55 or 555s. But actually, when you look at what wasn't shot down, again, we're going to ballistic missiles, we're going to anti-ship missiles. So 4 Kinzhal aeroballistic missiles weren't shot down. They got through, all 4 of them, all 8 anti-ship missiles, the KH-22s, all 6 Iskander-Ms, and all 2 KH-31P anti-radar missiles, which then you presume have hit probably a target that's a radar installation. So this represents, I think, a very difficult night for the Ukrainians, and we shouldn't think that just because we don't see pictures coming out, because Ukraine's very tight on OPSEC, that when they have these missile waves, there is vast amounts of damage being done to some aspect of Ukraine's attempt to defend themselves, whether it's a direct military target like a base or equipment or whatever, or whether it's manufacturing plants, or whether it's command and control, or whether it's radar and equipment. There will be a number. Look, that's a lot of missiles that got through, and those are not insignificant missiles either. As it says here, critical infrastructure facilities, industrial, civilian, and military facilities were attacked. And there's your admission. Military administrations will report on the consequences and victims on the ground. They will report on it, but you won't get much information. My summary would be that Ukraine probably took a bit of a pasting last night, and it's not going to be good for them. And they probably do on a fairly regular basis, which is why, yet again, yesterday, Zelensky was talking about the importance of air defenses, and they still don't have enough air defense systems. It's also the case that they need the missiles for those systems, but they just need more systems around, because Ukraine's a bloody massive country. And when you are having, when you are trying to reinvigorate your military industrial complex, you're going to be using facilities that already exist in large part. It's going to be very difficult to build entire factories from scratch. So you're going to be constrained somewhat in where these factories are. And factories aren't necessarily going to be all in Kiev, which is nicely protected by air defenses. These are going to be spread around the nation, and a lot of them will be out west, but just being out west and further away from missiles doesn't mean that missiles won't get there and they won't try. And in fact, we've seen the Russians fly missiles into Poland and turn them around and bring them back to give another route to attack the Ukrainians. So you can be on the western side of Ukraine and you are still not safe from these missile attacks. So it is a vast country that therefore needs a massive network of air defense systems. Now, talking about Kinzhals, this is really interesting. This is way more Kinzhals than I thought had been fired. Probably speaks to how many Kinzhals are being fired this winter regularly. So Yuri Ignat says 25 out of 63 Kinzhals have been shot down. Now, on the one hand, that's really good interception, because these were claimed by the Russians to be, invincible missiles that you couldn't shoot down, and they've shot down 25 of them. On the other hand, that's almost 40 missiles that have got through. Those 40 missiles will have done, every single one of those missiles will have done damage somewhere. Well, will have done damage somewhere, and so those will not be insignificant explosions either. And that is that's 40 odd missiles on military targets of some description, probably. This is a real challenge for the Ukrainians. So yes, they've done well, but they do well predominantly around Kiev, where they do have really decent air defense systems. But then the Russians have just got, I think they've probably gone, right, we're losing our Kinzhals when we fire them at Kiev. So as I said months ago, don't bother firing them at Kiev. There's no point. So they are evidently, I think, choosing other targets. Since the beginning of the full-scale war, as it says here, 63 Kinzhals have been sent. Now we have 63 daggers launched since the beginning of the full-scale invasion. The information is official. 25 destroyed starting from May the 4th. That's when we received the Patriot from last spring and got the ability to destroy the air ballistic missiles, said Yuri Ignat. Well, this is just another admission that basically it's only the Patriot really that can shoot these down. I don't know what the SAMP-T can do. Maybe able to shoot them down, but again, they don't really have many of them. So, it's mainly the Patriot, where I think they have They appear to have 2 in Kiev. I'd say 1 probably at Starokonstantinov in Khmelnytsky, which is the airbase that needs to be super well protected. And they may, I mean, different theories about how many Patriots. They've definitely got 3 Patriots and a couple of launchers, extra launchers, Patriot batteries. And they have been using 1 to put it in different areas, but, whether they've got more than that, I just don't know. There are 5 on order from Raytheon, or RTX as they're called now, or something like that. So they might have another one just being used here and there. Indeed, I'm just looking at some pictures right now that I've been sent of what looks like industrial places being hit in Khmelnytsky. So, yeah, it's looking like they've certainly hit something there, the Russians. Okay, as Euromaidan Press says, not a good morning. In Ukraine, there's a massive air alarm. Starts with, KH 101 and 555 and 55. Cruise missiles were reportedly launched by 295 bombers from the Caspian Sea direction. So that's over to the east of Ukraine. All of Ukraine is under missile threat, so this is going back some hours, of course. 15 groups of cruise missiles are now moving in mostly western and central directions. So imagine that, you're looking at the screen, you've got 15 groups of missiles firing towards Ukraine, and you're thinking, right, we need to deal with that. Goodness. So the missile groups change their direction multiple times in attempts to trick Ukraine's air defenses. Currently, main targets are in West and Dnipro, and where Exolodians reported, I don't know what that means. Here, in fact, this is useful. I showed you this before, and this isn't from last night, but this just gives you an indication of the routes that some of these missiles take, and they're not always just straight lines. In fact, very rarely, quite often they can take circuitous routes to places to try and fool air defenses and whatnot. Anyway. Kharkiv was hit multiple times yesterday throughout the day, and that is very often the case. It's very often the case that Kharkiv is hit with S-300 surface-to-air missiles. Middle-aged man died, 2 and were injured in the village of Nechladovka near Kupiansk in nearby Sankovo. A 17-year-old boy was injured. Vovchansk was also struck. Houses damaged and burned, says Tim White. So, lots of attention being given to a variety of places, but Kharkiv was definitely a target throughout yesterday. And then missile strikes on Ukraine here. On the night of January the 8th, Russian forces fired a series of missiles at Ukrainian territory. According to the Air Force, Kinzhals were used. The media reported explosions in Dnipro and Kharkiv, and a fire in a shopping centre in Kryvyi Rih, which is in this video. At the same time, the Russian Defense Ministry said that Ukrainian S-200 missiles had been shot down in the Belgorod region. So this is another example of going for commercial properties as well. So shopping centre in Kryvyi Rih, we saw another shopping centre recently taken out as well. So that's a real challenge for the Ukrainians. I'm not sure you can particularly justify striking shopping centres and that not being a war crime. I mean, you are going to kill civilians. That is not a military target. And as we saw recently, where was it? Was it one in Dnipropetrovsk, a shopping centre recently that was taken out, and a number of people died there. It was pretty horrific. Anyway, that's now Kryvyi Rih, which is sort of middle southeast of presently controlled Ukrainian territory. Controlled by Ukraine themselves. And then here we go on to other bits and pieces. Anton Gerashchenko talking to this idea of parts of Russia freezing and not having power. So it's Russia promised to freeze Europe, but it is now freezing itself. Accidents at utility companies are systemic, and Russian authorities can't handle them. Residents in the Moscow region city of Klimovsk, a micro-district in Podolsk, have not had access to heat or hot water for the 3rd day in a minus 20 degree frost because of a rupture at a utility plant to a break on the heating main on January the 4th. Residents are posting photos of burst heating radiators and pipes in their apartments and entrances, so apparently there is no talk of eliminating the consequences of the accident in the near future. Maximum 12 degrees of heat in houses, burst heating radiators. Some people make fires in their yards at night to keep warm. The local authorities are inactive, and instead of repairing utility systems, they offer drumroll blankets to those who are freezing. Regional Governor Andrei Vorobyov, who has not appeared in public at all for several days, is rumoured to have celebrated New Year's holidays outside of Russia. Reports of frozen apartments with corresponding photos quickly went viral on social networks. The reason why I'm communicating this to you is, one, is to kind of burst the propaganda bubble of Russia to say, oh, Europe's freezing. Actually, it's Russia that's freezing. Two, to show you that the money they're spending on the war could be better spent elsewhere. Three, to show you that 25 years of Putin rule has really not got Russia as far into the 21st century as they might have liked. And I just, when the money is so incredibly concentrated at the top of that oligarchy, and when you've got such an overt kleptocracy where they're corruptly stealing money from the state, effectively, you're stealing that money from the people. For every $1 billion that Vladimir Putin has creamed off the top as now the richest human being on earth, Vladimir Putin, every $1 billion that he has should have been spent on these people. Instead, he's spending it on palaces in Sochi and spending it on 11 super yachts. I had someone arguing with me that that's fine, that he's just you shouldn't have a go, look, Obama's rich and Bush is rich. No, ain't rich to this degree. And also, they get rich after, quite often after or prior to being the president. They don't get rich from being the president at the time of being president, right? So this is what a dictator does. Someone like Obama or David Cameron, or I know he's now foreign minister, but they all, not so much him, but actually Boris Johnson's a good example, will go on big speaking tours and they get paid stupid money to go and give speeches, and then they might have their fingers in a lot of pies in, I don't know, venture capitalism or whatever it is. That's how they make their money, but it's not from stealing, right? It's not from stealing from the state either. So Putin is, according to people like Bill Bowder, taking 50% from the oligarchs who are already taking incredible amounts themselves from these natural resources. They're then getting sold out around the world. That money isn't being taxed by the state to be spent on welfare and services for the people of Russia. It's being taken by Putin to be spent on his 11th super yacht. So when I say it's disgusting that he has 11 super yachts, anyone that defends that needs a head checked, right? Because that is kleptocracy. That is stolen. That money, those super yachts being paid for by money that should be spent on, hey, do you know what? Heating human beings in this region in Podolsk, right? It's just, I would be incensed if I was a Russian citizen, but they're so disenfranchised that they have no voice because the internal security services will shut them down and send to the gulag. You're not allowed to say anything critical of the government because there is no freedom of speech. And this is a wonder of the where I live. I love living in the UK. Why do I love living in the UK? Because I can frickin' say what I want. I can say what I want, and I do, and here I am saying what I want, and the police aren't going to come knocking on the door. I can slag off Rishi Sunak, and I do, right? And I despise our present government, and I will tell you quite openly about it. And do you know what? I can. But in Russia, they're so disenfranchised that even when in situations like this, it's a risk going out there and complaining about it. We'll come on to that in a second. So anyway, Vorobyov mentioned the accident only on January the 7th. On the fourth day of the promised day, he promised to open a temporary detention centre with heating. Clearly not enough for the nearly 30,000 people who found themselves without heat. He called the situation itself grave, but did not explain his absence for several days. By the way, the thesis of freezing Europe is regularly mentioned by the Russian authorities, who threaten to cut off gas to Western countries if the Kremlin's political demands are not met. For example, the thesis of Europe's total dependence on Russian supplies is often mentioned in Dmitry Medvedev's Telegram channel. For example, in August 2022, he promised to bring the gas price to European consumers to €5,000 per 1,000 cubic meters, and in September 2022, Gazprom released a video of the song for the song "And the Winter Will Be Long," in which a man with the inscription Gazprom on his uniform shuts off a gas valve. After that, an ice age occurs in European cities. Shots from Krasnoyarsk are also shown as an illustration of freezing Europe, ironically. As we can see, in reality, it's Russians who are freezing. And that's a situation to a point where some of them are now complaining. But again, this is high risk, and what they end up trying to do more when they complain is have old women and women to do that. I know there are men there as well, but it's more difficult for the Russians to be seen to be locking up older, like babushkas and whatnot. They are freezing, says Natalka here. Local residents of Salyatino, a city near Moscow, recorded a video appeal to draw attention to the authorities to the problem with heating in the city. We warm up with gas stoves, heaters, heated floors by all means available. We have a boiler room that constantly stops working. Sometimes it works, others it doesn't. Constantly some excuses. Unhappy residents and negative comments in chats get blocked. And again, that's your disenfranchisement. You're having the power taken away from you. Your political involvement gets taken away from you because you have no voice. You have no ability to voice your concerns. Inside apartments, it's 13 to 14 degrees Celsius. We have children and the elderly. Please help. We are freezing. So on and so forth. So, not looking good there. Ukrainian strikes on Russian fuel depots plus railways in southern Russia and Donbass are having a knock-on distribution effect inside the Russian economy. So I don't know whether this is just completely anecdotal, right? So do be warned when you see things like this, and when I talk about this, hopefully I will give you the caveats that are necessary. But when we saw earlier about the problem with eggs, and initially people were like, yeah, it's just, a queue there for eggs, whoop-de-doo. But actually that started becoming more and more common around Russia, to the point where they've had to start in importing an absolute ton of eggs from Turkey and from Kazakhstan and from other places. It was actually an issue with the price of eggs affecting things there. So here we have an issue with fuel, potentially, where there are big old queues to gas stations, in petrol stations in parts of Russia or occupied areas of Russia. So gas stations or occupied areas of Ukraine. Gas stations today in Muscovy, firstly eggs, then chickens, and now fuel. Everything is like before the collapse of the USSR. I don't know whether it's that bad. They obviously have a huge amount of crude oil and the ability to refine oil, surely, in Russia. So I don't know how this comes about so much. I mean, it could just be localized, some kind of logistics being affected. Russian attacks cut off power in 2 mines, on the other hand, in Donetsk Oblast. So this is a challenge for Ukrainians, where they themselves are getting hit. And here we have working mines that are aiding the economy and aiding the war effort, having themselves cut off due to shelling from the Russians, as well as a few other things to point out here. Oh yeah, Japan pledging 37 million for anti-drone equipment for Ukraine, but we'll come on to that later. Anyway, that's enough from me. Please like, subscribe, and share. Really appreciate all your support. Thank you so much. Go and watch the chat I had on Tochny last night. I think that was a really illuminating discussion. I will be mirroring that on my channel later today once I get a chance to sort of cut it down to lop off the news part at the beginning, because you guys already hear that from me, and then I'll put that out today. But anyway, thanks again. Take care. Speak soon.